Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to give you sort of a perspective, right? Some insight into working in an inpatient adolescent psychiatry unit and really highlight, as I often do, my passion for understanding the way that our brain and our body interact in relation to the psychosocial world. When we try to understand how to treat people with mental health conditions, I think it is absolutely imperative that we try to understand the neurodevelopmental and really psychophysiological developmental windows of the individual. We need to understand how this person has developed who they are and that process of who they are becoming in relation to their future self, and then that current dynamic, that interpersonal as well as psychodynamic sort of process. It's messy, it's complicated, and that's why I love it. So, as I was working on the psychiatric unit with adolescents, I've become increasingly convinced that we need a model of care that targets the environment, that targets the milieu, that understands that it is in fact the genes that interact and express themselves in concert with the environment that produces the reality of being. So we understand psychiatric disorders fundamentally using a subjective diagnostic system. Therefore, our cultural understanding, our beliefs color how we go about using the diagnostic statistical manual. We may argue to use one or more diagnoses because it's pragmatic, practical, useful for our prescribing practice. But I think there are serious limitations when we understand how to diagnose without really looking at the way that that individual is interacting with the social world. It's messy. So, when I was working on the psychiatric unit the other day, I was doing a group on medications. We're required daily to now do groups and to chart, which is a lot of work, but nonetheless, there are opportunities here. And I wanted to speak to how important it is on a psychiatric unit, like an inpatient unit, for children as well as adults, to have the patients actually actively engaged in a process of relating or of doing some kind of activity. We know that the brain is, its preference is the default neural network. We know that the default neural network is more active in people who are depressed and anxious, as well as psychotic. We know that the default neural network seems to be primed for exploratory as well as social sort of thinking. We know these things. Therefore, we should target this brain state with interventions that modulate and interact with it, that regulate it. So we have to understand the default neural network, what it's there for, what is the functional praxis, the pragmatic utility of that default neural network, and how do we target that network through active psychological engagement? How do we regulate that such that the individual, well, has a better sense of their own self-regulation? Well, I think groups is a great opportunity. But what's interesting is understanding how the individual actually is interacting in the group setting in contrast with a one-to-one setting. And then looking at going deeper and saying, depending on the age, the developmental age of the individual as well as their temperament, how does that interact with how they interact with the group? Cool, right? Fascinating. So I was doing the group and sort of asking them to be engaged in the group. And I noticed one of the girls raised her hand. So I said, "What would you like to say? What's your question?" I pointed at her, and she said, "Well, I don't have a question." She put her hand down. And she continued to do this again as the other people raised their hands. And I had this huge epiphany that, my goodness, in some sense I've been right all along, but for the adolescent population, they are much more influenced than other populations. In fact, I think there's reason to believe that young girls are the population that are most easily influenced by the cultural sort of phenomena, the social influences. And I was like, my goodness, what a responsibility we have as clinicians, as adults, for our children who are like these sponges. They mirror the behavior. Think of the mirror neurons that were discovered with monkeys. We automatically mirror each other. We take an intentional stance on the world. We are forward-looking. That's why Iacobucci articulated the seeking system. We are made for culture. We are cultural beings that look into the future, and we mirror each other, and we think of ideas about the world, and we personify the world. Yes, this is how we work. But I came to the conclusion that these young girls, which really are the bulk of the patient population I'm currently interacting with, are in desperate need for proper social experiences, right? That is to say, active psychological engagement that is being really managed by well-adjusted adults. The therapy, the healing, does not begin with introduction of Prozac or Effexor or Wellbutrin. The healing begins when the individual takes a sense of their own self-responsibility in producing something like a stable identity, right? But we have to give them opportunities to explore who they are, right, within a safe context, yes, to promote self-regulation. And as adults, we can give that gift that we so beautifully were able to receive because of the secure base of our attachment figures. I think this is a very holistic approach. It makes the most sense. I borrow from Dan Siegel. I'm very interested in interpersonal neurobiology, applying our insights about how, we do develop, how the memory and brain systems work, our very real capacity to change as evidenced by neuroplasticity, and the things that we can do really without medicine to promote neurogenesis and brain change. There's so much at our disposal in the way that we have been made. Yes, to be human is to heal, I think. And we heal one another when we have the right context for proper psychological development. So I wanted to reflect on that. These young girls are so easily influenced, and you, as an adult, are also influenced. We have great responsibility over one another. What an interesting and exciting process to be a part of this as a human being. So with that all being said, if you found anything I said here interesting or relatable or insightful, I encourage you to comment below. You can like the video and you can subscribe if you'd like to see more from me. Take great care. Bye.